With the Mythic Plus commentary that I've been promising to make. So this what this is gonna be is this is a VOD from my Twitch, and it's gonna be a Mythic 13 Mob Souls with an alt group. So this video is not meant to demonstrate how to play Affliction in Mythic Plus when you're running with carry groups, when you're running with groups that are far outgearing the content. This is an Affliction Mythic Plus video for people who are, starting out as Affliction. You don't outgear the content. You are, the Mythic Plus that you're joining is not one that's going to be easy for you to complete in time, and you're not able to pull mass amounts of mobs because you guys just can't handle that yet. So what I wanted to show you was, what kind of build I'm running, how to play it on trash, how to play it on the boss, and then, everything else in between, and kind of explain to you guys how we do this. So here it is with my group in the Mob Souls. Now this is just a bunch of friends that I have, but they're all in their alt characters, so they brought me in as a little bit of a carry because 13 is not too easy and the bosses are tyrannical. So just real quick before we start, I just want to talk about my talents really quickly. The talents that I am running for this video are going to be Writhe and Agony, Absolute Corruption. I'm going to be running Siphon Life, the Doomguard, Supremacy, Grimoire, and I'm also going to be running Soul Conduit. This build I think is ideal for Mythic Plus where you're only pulling a few mobs, and especially for Tyrannical, because you're going to be able to do a lot of boss DPS without having to run Soul Effigy, which will greatly bring down your trash DPS. So it's a nice balance between trash and boss DPS. If it wasn't Tyrannical, I would be running Sow the Seeds, but since it is Tyrannical, I'm not running Sow the Seeds. I'm going to be running a more single target oriented build, so my trash DPS will not be as high as possible, but it will still be good enough to get good numbers throughout the instance. So basically the idea of this build of what you want to be doing is you're going to want to see just maintain a few agonies and a few row sets of dots on targets. You don't really want to maintain too many dots on too many targets. You're going to find yourself falling behind. So you see, I just kind of shove out a few agonies, and I make sure that my shard count is low. I kind of prioritize keeping my shard count low as possible, so whenever I do have the opportunities to spam out those UAs, I do. And you see, I'm only really going to be maintaining about, 3 or 4 agonies. I'm not really going to go so much above that, and to spread my corruption to everybody, I'm going to be casting Sow the Seeds. So the general gameplay that you guys are going to be seeing throughout this instance, you see me refreshing my agonies, keeping my agonies up at 20 stacks, using Sow the Seeds whenever I need to refresh my corruptions, or rather not refresh, but generate corruptions on new mobs, and then whenever I'm close to hitting Soul Shard cap, I'm going to be popping my Reap Souls, and I'm going to be spamming out those UAs. So that's just kind of going to be the theme of trash DPS. So you see, I'm just, maintaining my agonies, maintaining dots on just a few of the targets, maximum 3 or 4. You're not going to be able to do too many more with stats with only, the amount of haste that I'm running. You're not going to be able to do much more than that. So you see, I dot this mob up, I put Seed of Corruption. As all the mobs are grouping up, it's going to spread corruption to all of them, and then I'm going to start, dotting a few with Siphon Life. My soul shards are starting to get capped, so now I'm thinking about, I want to get these UAs out. I don't care too much about my dot timers anymore. Siphon Life is not a DPS increase, overcasting my UA on my dot timer, so my pet died here. I'm going to resummon that, and then I'm going to go back to spamming those UAs and maintaining the agonies. I would prioritize refreshing high stack agonies over UA, but when you do have a lot of shards, you see I'm just sitting here spamming UA. I try to refresh that agony, it didn't end up working out, but it's okay. So I just go back, just keep spamming out these UAs. Don't worry about Siphon Life on trash pulls like this where you just have so many shards, because it's not a DPS increase. Once you're a little bit lower in the shard count, you can worry about refreshing your other dots more, and then once you get back higher on the shard count, you can start spamming out those UAs. And you see, even though I'm not maintaining this DPS rotation perfectly whatsoever, and it's kind of just like thrown together on the trash, I'm still doing really reasonable damage. I'm not using any AoE trinkets, I'm not using anything, fancy like that. It's just pure mastery. Really pumping out this damage, and you see once the trash starts to get low, I start putting those Siphon Lives out again, because I don't have enough shards to pump out all the UAs. And now at this point in the build, after this, I think I'm going to refresh my Unalash here, you're going to want to start thinking about the boss. So after you've dealt with the trash, just before the boss, you want to be thinking, okay, I want to save up my Reaper stacks, I want to save up Wrath of Consumption if I can before we pull the boss. I just want to get as many shards and things like that before we end up pulling the boss. And you'll note that every time a mob is about to die, I try to get a UA on it, because you do get that shard refund. So you see, I have 6 stacks on my Reap, I have 4 shards, I'm ready to do, a whole hell of a lot of boss DPS, just waiting on the Druid's mana. So when we pull, I'm going to pre-pot, and then I'm just, quickly go over my single target rotation for the boss. So just going to wait for this Druid to get mana. So the idea of single target is you want to make sure you're maintaining all your dots at all times, obviously, except for UA. You only really want to be doing UAs during your Reap, unless you're capping out on shards, because if you UA during Reap, you're just going to be doing so much more damage, and when you're running a build like Soul Conduit, you tend to have a lot of shards as well. So I just want to maintain, like, you know, as much uptime as I can on Unstable Affliction during Reap Souls, and then out of Reap Souls, I'm not worried about it too much, especially playing an Absolute Corruption build. So you're just going to see me, you know, refreshing my Agonies and my Siphon Life at good times here. So you see, you know, I'm getting into that Pandemic range, I'm making sure I refresh my stuff, I run into that, I use my Hellstone right away. It's kind of a new move to make, but it is what it is. So just making sure I keep as much damage as I can up during my pot here, keeping my dots rolling, wait until I get a few more shards to do a UA dump here, and when he does spawn the ads, you're going to see me, you know, I just cast a Sow the Seeds on the boss here, you know, throw out a few of those Agonies to get a little bit more shard gen, but I just Sow Seeds the boss just to get corruption on all the ads. I proc my Safus with the Halaterra, that's what I've been doing with my Hal, if you guys haven't noticed, I've just been using that to proc, and I just spam Seed of Corruption because I don't really have a good way of AoEing these trash packs down, and they need to die relatively quickly, so just casting, you know, Seed of Corruption on the boss is the best way for me to get around doing that. So yeah, you know, just maintain everything you can on the boss. Every time that you pop those Re-Expose Souls, make sure you're dumping your UAs into the boss, and besides that, you just really need to be draining life. This build is very, very easy to run on single target, and you see I'm pulling really good numbers. Obviously, it's a little bit inflated because of the trash packs, but you'll see on other bosses, I do great DPS as well. It's not boss dependent at all. As long as you make sure you're saving those Reap stacks and things like that in between, you're going to be doing good DPS, especially if this was during less and things like that. So just make sure you know exactly what I'm doing. Pop my second pot, use my Reap Soul stacks, spam those UAs into the target, spamming Drain Life in between as a filler, does a lot of damage. Ads spawn again, you're going to see me doing the same thing, you know, applying those Agonies, getting extra shard gen while they're up, and just spamming that Seed of Corruption on the boss. Use the Halaterra again, proc my Safus, and just keep spamming Seed to spread my dots to the ads. Really good strategy to do on this boss at least, and then, you know, all the ads die, I gain my Wrath of Consumption stacks. I do not have Reap stacks here. I might pop that one, you know, just for the last 5 Agonies or so, which I did do there, so that's good play. But I wanted to spam with those Agonies because I was getting shard capped, or sorry, yeah, Agony or Unstable Afflictions because I was getting shard capped, and I had my Wrath of Consumption. And you see my DPS very high for a single target encounter. Obviously, some of it's off the ads, but you know, still, doing 660k consistent damage on a boss fight is very good for any class, and that's what you kind of want at Tyrannical, so this build is very, very good to run for Tyrannical. So we're going to be getting back to the trash, and the trash is very similar to what the first trash was. I'm going to, you know, precast a Seed of Corruption here on the mob, just so you know when when everything stacks up together, I can get as much spread on the corruption as I can. He only pulled 2, however, so I'm just going to do it again, you know, because these other 3 are coming over. It's the fastest way for me to spread corruption. I'm going to get a few unstable afflictions out and just maintain a few agonies on the target. I'm not going to go crazy with my agonies because I know those timers are going to be too hard for me to maintain. And then once my shards get capped, I'm just going to be worrying about spamming those UAs out. Just maintaining a few dots. You see, I'm not going crazy. I'm not trying to dot, you know, 500 things. I'm just maintaining dots on, you know, 3 to 4 targets at a time. I find that's about the cap for a build like this. You really just can't maintain all your dots on more targets like this without, you know, crazy gameplay. And I think 3 to 4 is good enough for me anyways. And you see, you're doing good DPS. You know, I'm doing over 800k on a trash pack with like, what, 5 mobs? That's pretty good DPS. Obviously, you know, if I was running a build that was spec'd more for AoE, I could do a little bit more, but 800k, you know, that's pretty solid, especially for a Mythic 13. And even if you don't have as much gear as me, with gear like as long as you're running high mastery, your damage should be great as this build. High mastery, high intellect, and high crit. Haste isn't so important as this build because it doesn't really affect your damage too much. It's more about the mastery and the crit. That's really going to bring your numbers up with this build. And you see, I just use Sow the Seeds every time to apply that corruption to the mobs. It's a really effective way of doing it. And I'm just spamming out those UAs whenever I get soul shard capped, and you know, doing as much damage as possible. And, you know, we're making good time. Even though the other players in my group aren't doing as much damage, it's more of a carry, we're still making good time. As long as, you know, you're doing higher level mythics and your tank's pulling at a good rate and you have a couple people, you know, doing good DPS, you're gonna be able to, you know, push through that mythic plus relatively quickly. Even though we're not, you know, pulling mass amounts of mobs like you would normally on mythic runs, especially if you're running with like a higher level a group that really outgears the content. Like for example, if I was running with a group like my guild and we were pulling, you know, an instance like this, we might pull, you know, all the way up to the hounds, we might pull all that trash with the hounds, and in that case it would be much more effective for me to run an AoE build. But you have to recognize what sort of mythic plus you're running, what sort of, you know, gear your group has, and when you do that, you're going to be able to optimize your spec around that a lot better. And that's one of the really things I like about Affliction Lock right now, is especially in Mythic Plus, is there's a lot of options, and since there's so many options, you can really do whatever you want. So we pulled the Mariner. I know this guy's gonna, you know, have a lot of health, he's gonna do a lot of damage, especially when he casts that lantern ability. So I'm just getting as many UAs on him as I can and popping a lot of I want to say CDs, but Warlock doesn't really have any CDs. I'm just doing as much damage as him to as I can to make sure he dies really, really quickly. So I see, you know, my recount doesn't reset during this phase for some reason. I don't know why my add-on doesn't reset during between trash pulls down here. I'm pretty sure we do drop combat, but you know, you can see my damage, you know, under the bow, very, very good. I'm maintaining 500k. I would think it'd be a little bit higher than that, but you know, we're only pulling one mob at a time at this point, so it's totally okay. So we're pulling this guy up to the other champions, and you know, I'm gonna make sure my pet kind of dodges these hounds here if we can. So we're gonna try to bring him up here. I don't remember if we do pull these hounds or not. I don't think we do. So you know, just make sure you're managing your pet at all times in the instance. Just be aware of him. And I think the Grand Marker bugs here for some reason. He just stops moving and stops attacking and doesn't really cast anything anymore. I'm not sure why. I think he got like stuck in the wall or something like that, something really silly. So I'm just, you know, doing a little bit of damage, saving up my reap stacks, and I know this trash, you know, we don't really need to kill it that quickly, so I'm just, you know, waiting for when I have enough shards to dump, and we're more worried about those champions than anything else. So I'm not really using too many like reap stacks or anything like that. I'm kind of saving them because you know what's coming next? The boss is coming up next. So you're gonna want to be thinking about saving damage for that boss at this point, because your damage on like the last trash pack before the boss is really, really not important, especially on an affix like Tyrannical, because your DPS on the boss is going to matter way more than your DPS on the trash, obviously, because the boss is doing, you know, way more damage, has way more health. So you see, I'm just casting Seed, get those corruptions out, and then just spamming some agonies here. I do pop my Reap stack, but I will not use Reap again, I believe, before the boss is pulled. I don't think I'll use any of these Reap stacks that I'm generating off these two trash packs. Make sure you guys are using your kick on the fear as well in this instance. Just a side note, obviously that's not happening in every instance, but I'm just maintaining my dots on these targets, you know, maintaining my UAs on them, making them die at relatively even times. But you know, Warlock is very good. This build is exceptional at 2 target cleave, it's exceptional at 3 target cleave. 4 targets, it's reasonable. 5 targets, it starts to get a little bit hairy, and anything past 5 targets with a build like this, you're basically doing the same damage as you would on 3 targets. It's basically like a 3 to 4 target build is what I'm running. So if your group's going to be pulling, you know, 3 to 4 targets, this is the build I would recommend you do. So you see, I have 6 stacks again before we pull the boss, which I think is enough for the boss. And yeah, so I'm just going to maintain the exact same thing I did the first boss, maintain my 3 dots, wait until I get, you know, decent amount of shards, pop my read stacks, pop my CDs, and then just UA dump into the boss. This is the way you want to be playing with Absolute Corruption. You don't just want to use soul shards whenever you have them, and whenever ads spawn, you want to make sure that you're dotting them, especially as a UA Warlock. Obviously, you know, generate a lot of damage. So you see, you know, these little ads are spawning on my friend here. I'm going to go ahead and dot those up as well, especially with those agonies for that increased shard gen. The more shard gen equals more UAs equals more damage. And I'm just going to go back to spamming these UAs because I have a few free globals here without my dots being refreshed. So just making sure, you know, I keep my shard count relatively low during Reap, and trying to maintain my UA uptime during that. Boss fights are relatively easy, especially when you're not running something like Soul Effigy, things like that. Just make sure you're doing mechanics well. And maintaining those 3 dots, you don't really lose too much damage. The only part where you're really losing damage is 1, if you let your agony fall, and 2, if you remain soul shard capped for too long, and 3, if you're dumping your soul shards outside of Reap. So don't dump your soul shards outside of Reap. You can use like 1 or 2 if you don't want to remain capped. That's definitely a good thing to do. But yeah, I mean, obviously right now I have Wrath of Consumption, I have my pot up, I pop my stacks, and I'm dumping UAs. So I'm just doing huge damage here on the boss. You see, I'm not doing quite as much as the first boss, but we don't have Lust. We don't have a lot of extra ad spawning that I can pad off of. But, you know, I'm still doing a relatively high amount. I'm pushing up to, you know, 450k without Lust, which is a very reasonable number. I'm sitting at 5 shards, so this is nowhere near, you know, going to go down anytime soon, and it's relatively consistent. And you can't say that about a lot of classes, especially, this is one thing that's really nice about Affliction Locks is they're super duper consistent when it comes to playing in Mythic Plus. So that's something, you know, you should really look forward to as an Affliction Lock. You're not cooldown dependent. You're going to basically do the same damage on every single trash, compared to a class like, say, a Fire Mage. They will not do the same damage every single trash. They have cooldowns like Combustion, and they have cooldowns like Rune of Power, things like that. So obviously Fire Mage is a very powerful class, don't get me wrong, but every trash pull, they're not going to be doing the same DPS. It's going to have really, really high variance about how much damage they're doing on the trash packs. Some trash packs, they might just completely annihilate it, do 2 million, and then some, they might just be sitting there, doing 200k DPS. But Warlock, every single time on the trash, you should be doing relatively the same numbers, which is something that's kind of nice. It's kind of needed in a group. You're pulling those consistent numbers, similar to something like an enhancement shaman. You don't have a whole lot of cooldowns and things like that. Oh shit! One sec. Let's pause this. I'm in a mumble channel.
Most important fucking kill.
They're talking about Guarm. So yeah. Oh shit, I'm streaming this, that's fine. I'll take the stream bot. Anyways, so, just maintaining those dots on Harboron. And yeah. So, the boss is about to die. Now we're going to start thinking about the trash. So, I'm not going to use too many more Reap stacks, but I mean, I really just want the boss to die. This is Tyrannical, our Demon Hunter is dead, trying to do as much damage as possible. You see him, doing 460k DPS. Pretty good. So, after this boss, we're going to be moving on to the trash. And so, going back to the trash DPS, very, very easy again. Just a quick note, if you guys didn't know, I'm using Mastery Food and my In Flask. So, that's just something really basic. Just use Mastery Food. If you're running a dot build, use Mastery. If you're running a So build, use Crit. So, I'm not sure how the tank is going to do this, so I'm just stacking on the tank, waiting to see what he's going to pull. So, my group over here pulls these mobs, and the tank was thinking about something different, so it's a little bit of a mess, but I try to make up for it. So, just making up for it, we're going to put some agonies on the target, get a few dots. You're going to see, I'm not going to go super crazy here. Just try to maintain dots on a few targets again. Don't go crazy with this build. If you go crazy with this build, you're going to end up hurting yourself in the long run. And you don't want to do that, because if you start letting, if you're trying to dot too many things, and you're getting too many agonies out, and they start falling and things like that, your DPS is just going to be a lot lower than it should be. So, just maintaining good play again, just not letting myself get soul shard cap for too long, maintaining dots on 3 to 4 targets, using my Safus whenever it's available with my Howl of Terror. I do get Fit here, which is unfortunate, and I do let my agony fall because of that. One thing to note about this trash though is try not to dot the Swift Blades too much. They're kind of an annoyance. They go in stealth, they gain that 50% deflection on magic abilities. Try to focus down the Mistcallers and the champions if you can. Especially running this build, you see I go into my character book and click my Fear Trinket because I didn't have it on my action bars, because I just honestly wasn't thinking about it, that it would be useful for this instance. But anyways, the next trash pack is obviously going to go a lot better than this. This one was kind of sort of unplanned because the DPS pulled one thing, the tank pulled another. Always try to let your tank pull, but we still manage, and still doing good damage on trash. This build is I think the best hybrid build for Warlock currently in Mythic Plus. And by hybrid I mean good trash DPS, good boss DPS. Any other sort of build that you're going to be running, like So the Seas or something, you're going to lose a lot of boss DPS. You're basically losing Siphon Life, and Siphon Life does about 260k every time you use it. Probably a little bit more than that actually, but it does a lot of damage every time you use it. It's a dot, you don't have to really think about applying too much. It lasts a long time, it generates a lot of healing. I don't know how much of a boss DPS increase it is. I would assume it's probably around like 10 to 30k or so, which on an affix like Tyrannical is quite significant. So just maintaining all my dots out here, maintaining my agonies, stuff dying, we're getting Reap stacks, all that good stuff. And yeah, so going to be looking to move on to the last trash and stuff like that, and hell yeah. So on a boss fight like hell yeah, it's probably the easiest one on Tyrannical, which is why we're doing this modules with this group in particular. You see our damage is relatively low, especially on boss fights. These guys, aren't super geared. We're kind of just doing it so they get their 12 key done for the week. It is a 13, but 13 does count towards your 12 key done for the week, and it's a relatively easy one because modules. Trash is super easy in modules, and not only is trash super easy, but the last boss, hell yeah, is super easy. Instances you don't want to do on Tyrannical, things like that, are going to be like Eye of Ashara, it's really hard, the last boss, Court of Stars, the last boss, really difficult. So, you see, I'm not too worried about dotting like the little ads on this thing. I'm really just worried about dotting the bigger ones. As I say that, I dot a little one. But you just want to focus on dotting the big ones, and then if you do want to, get dots on the little ones, especially to proc that Wrath of Consumption and things like that, you can use Seed of Corruption to get corruption on all those little ads. Sometimes, once the big ads start dying, I'll start putting some agonies up on the little ads to try to generate more soul shards. But really, you just want to focus on killing the big guy, because once you kill the big guy, you get to go kill the boss. Don't worry about padding too much. You just want to, get through the instance. So, just, using Seed of Corruption to get those things in the ads to proc my Wrath of Consumption, and then besides that, I'm really just only spamming my Unstable Afflictions into the main guy. I'm not, deviating, spamming my Unstable Afflictions on the small guys. I'm just, tap targeting them to put a few little dots upon them, procking my Safus, things like that, and just generating as much damage as possible. So, Affliction's pretty easy to play in Mythic Plus. I don't think it's too hard of a spec. It gets a little hectic when there's a lot of ads and you're maintaining dots on, like 3 or 4 of them, and there's like 10. Hopefully that situation doesn't happen too much. Generally, when that situation happens, tend to just like keep dots on 1 to 2 targets and then just spam sow the seeds, as that's gonna do, or sorry, seed of corruption, as that's just gonna do more damage for you than trying to dot multiple targets. Plus, it's just going to be way less of a headache, and then you just, dump your UAs whenever you get up to 5 stacks. So, if you guys didn't know, you can use Seed of Corruption to put Corruption on all 3 of these tentacles at the start. They're close enough spaced together that works out for you. So, I just, I had a full stack of Reap before the boss, which I do every single time. Pop my Reap stacks, dump my UAs, like very consistent themes throughout the dungeon, basically doing the same thing. And you might find that boring or not, I don't know. I don't mind it too much because, it does require some foresight and things like that. To use your stacks and things like that to make sure you save damage before the boss. And yeah, so just do good damage on these ads. This is actually the hardest part of the fight, if you didn't know, is the tentacles, because the tentacles have a lot of health, and because the tentacles have a lot of health, they take a long time to die. And if you didn't know, that the destructor tentacles can actually spawn more than 1 at a time if you don't kill them fast enough. So, if you have 2 destructor tentacles out and your tank can only tank 1 of them, the other one's just going to be slamming people for, a million, and they're going to die really quickly. So make sure you're prioritizing the destructor tentacles, make sure you're, off-dotting the grasping tentacles. And yeah, it's not an easy fight, and you're going to see we end up lusting on the tentacles because we're falling so far behind because our DPS is so low. Yeah, I'm not sure what our Demon Hunter is doing. I think this is a pretty good fight for a Demon Hunter because you can just, fell rush between the mobs and you're cleaving them all. But anyways, just make sure, I'm just making sure I'm dumping as much damage onto this destructor tentacle as possible, because I know that another one will spawn, and when the other one spawns, like that, we're going to be in a lot of trouble. So I think this is where they press lust. I'm not entirely sure. Yeah, so they lust here. Make sure we try to get down both these destructor tentacles if we can't deal with them. And then once Helia spawns, Helia is a really easy fight. As long as you kill her within like I would say 3 phases on Tyrannical, you should be fine. We do end up beating the timer in this dungeon, which is nice. We beat it by about, I think, a minute or something like that, maybe less than a minute. But yeah, just showing you guys that, like, Affliction Lock can carry through Mythic Plus, especially with a build like this. You don't have to be running something fancy like Sow the Seeds. Sow the Seeds build is very, very easy to run as an Affliction Lock. It's not difficult at all. So yeah, I thought this would be, the best one to kind of go over and then post up, because I feel like running like a Sow the Seeds build and showing you guys a video on that would be fairly not useful, because a lot of warlocks aren't able to like do Mythic Plus carries and things like that. They either don't have the friends to do it, they don't have the gear to do it, and this is much more like, I don't know how to describe it, a much more practical, this is what a lot of other locks are probably going to be doing instead of running the Sow build. Although, if the bosses aren't tyrannical, I would change Siphon Life for Sow just to get a little bit extra trash DPS to make the instants go a little bit faster, because my total damage would be higher running Sow the Seeds, but running a build like this, my boss DPS is a lot better. So you see, I'm doing good damage on the boss, at least over 450k every single boss fight, which is good. It's not great, especially for Mythic Plus, because Mythic Pluses are so condensed. Classes like Warriors and Reptiles and things like that are using like old war pots are going to be doing huge amounts of damage on the boss, like 700k DPS or something crazy, but that's because they're cooldown oriented classes. They only do damage really during the cooldowns, and outside of their cooldowns their damage really dips off. But the bosses don't live for long enough that dip really happens, you know what I mean? Like in raiding, you see that a lot more. In raiding, you see, Reptiles, Warriors, Demon Hunters, things like that. They spike at the top for, the first minute and a half, and then they start to fall down a lot. They fall down really quickly. Same thing with Fire Mages, but Warlocks, we don't really fall down. We kind of ramp up, and then we maintain, which is a nice thing about Lock. Although it might suck in Mythic Plus because you might feel like you're not doing a lot of damage relative to these other classes because, they're so high up on the meter, but that just might be because the boss died in 30 seconds, right? And you needed that ramp that you didn't get. But on Tyrannical, it's going to even out, because on Tyrannical the boss is not going to die, in a minute and a half. It's going to die in 3 or 4 minutes, and your DPS is going to be, relatively high for that whole time. So yeah, the boss is going to die. We're going to get our loot. That's about all I have to say about the build. Just maintain, dots on 3 to 4 targets. Don't worry about many more than that. Use Seed of Corruption to apply all your corruptions on the targets. Use good reap usage. Right now I'm just spamming my UAs because I want the boss to die. I basically want to get as much damage as I can out before she submerges again. I'm just trying to kill it, basically. That's why I'm not using ideal DPS rotation here, because I just want to get as much damage as out quickly before she submerges. Because I want to try to 2-phase this thing, because we only have a minute and 19 seconds left. Looking back, maybe I should have saved and, done the ideal DPS rotation, but I just wanted to get as much damage as I could before she submerged the second time. So here she goes down again. When she comes back up again, we do end up killing her and beat the timer on the 13. So that's pretty good, especially running with an alt group. And you see the Demon Hunter, isn't doing too much damage. The Hunter was doing okay damage with the whole thing, but yeah, Affliction Lock, definitely a good Mythic Plus spec. Don't think it's not. You can run a vast majority of builds, and so yeah. I'm going to post this Twitch VOD now, I guess. I meant to do it as a recording, but it's fine as a Twitch. I'm going to post this on my YouTube, and yeah, so I hope you guys like that. And I will be streaming Mythic Worm tonight, so that's exciting. I hope we kill him. So yeah, this was the Mythic Plus. I don't get anything from the chest, so that's always good. So yeah, thanks for watching.